trying to accomplish several things here during my tenure. One of those things is to decrease the rate of suicide. That's one of the goals. The other one is to close Ash Street Jail. Now, if you say, how did those two things, how did those goals trigger this? You know, what was the trigger? One of the things we had to do to decrease suicide is actually take inmates and put the new admissions, the people that just got here, put them in a more communal setting. And so we had to move in the new admits from one housing unit that was single cells and double cells, which is a risk factor for people who are, who are new admissions here, because they're new here, they are uncertain about what's going to happen. They've never been arrested before. It's a serious charge. These are risk factors for suicide. They think their life is over. And so we had to change the housing unit around. So when in the process of moving those around, we had actually, starting on Tuesday, been moving several housing units around. This most recent housing unit, this one was, it was called GB. And that was the one that we're going to see pictures of right now. We also were going to be moving GA. GB and GA, so as I said before, these are people who are awaiting trial, and they were also people who were, really, they were tough inmates. These were not people who would be in there for like pre-release or anything. We had some people in GB who were awaiting trial for multiple murder charges, a lot of recidivists. It was a tough group to begin with. So when they got word on Thursday that they were going to be moved on Friday to a different housing unit, we have the video footage of this too. They already started talking amongst themselves the night before to push back. They didn't want to change the housing unit because they knew where they were going was going to be a housing unit that had locked doors. So they started talking amongst themselves, and we learned this afterwards reviewing the footage. So they protested, and they, I don't call this a riot though. A riot by definition is violent. There was really no violence. This was destructive, but it wasn't violent. Nobody got hurt, COs or, the inmates, and that was one of the two main goals that I had. The first one was to de-escalate the situation. The second one was that nobody gets hurt. I guess the third goal would have been to take back the housing unit, in which we accomplished those second and third objectives. So that was one thing, is that we had to, move inmates into housing units that are communal settings, so that way we have more eyes on new admissions. The second goal was, and we were going to be doing GA and GB, we want to put toilets in cells, because when you can put a toilet in a cell, then you can lock the door. And roughly half the cells here in BC, in the Sheriff's Office, they don't lock. We have 11 housing units. I'm not sure out of how many, but we have a total of 11 that don't have locks on the doors because there's no toilets in the cells. We have 7 here, and then we have 4 at the Women's Center. The 4 housing units at the Women's Center, none of them have locks on doors. So as we were doing these two different things, we're putting, we're making it more suicide resistant, and by, putting inmates into a communal setting, the new admits, but then we're also taking on the different housing units, putting locks on doors. And at the same time we're putting the locks on doors, the maintenance crew are going to go through and make the beds more suicide resistant. And we just talked about that on April 14th. We showed there was a prototype for that. So those are the two reasons that we were shuffling inmates around. We wanted to put toilets in cells, locks on doors, new suicide-resistant beds, put the new admits in places, so that some inmates got in their head they wanted to stay right where they were, and it doesn't work like that. The response that was from them was, even before the COs, there were 4 COs in the housing unit at the time. At some point in the future, the footage will be released where the COs acted very quickly. It could have become a hostage situation, it could have, but there's a red button on a control panel, which we'll show you in one of these pictures. In fact, we're gonna also turn off one of those lights so we'll see this better. But when we show you the pictures though, you'll see there's a red button. The COs hit the button, back themselves out and lock themselves in. And what that button did was it deactivated the whole control panel. Had the COs not acted quickly and deactivated the control panel, 75 inmates from GB could have gone out into the courtyard, which is the aerial footage you saw from the helicopters. They could have gotten out there, and they could have also gotten on the roof. And so if the inmates hadn't been all contained, and then we got our large response of over 100 security officers from other parts of the state, if it was just our staff dealing with that when it first was going down at 9 o'clock, people would have gotten hurt. So the COs shutting things down, backing out, and saying, just, you know, cordoning off that housing unit, that kept us from having a true riot. You know, so otherwise this was just damage. It was a lot of damage, not to minimize it, but it was, I can't thank them enough for responding, you know, exactly the way they should have to prevent what happened from getting worse. So the next thing is, you know, I was called down and made it clear, no dogs. We didn't want dogs. That was the difference with how things were handled in the past. I didn't want the dogs present for a number of reasons. The first one is when the public sees dogs, they think, what do dogs do? They bite. Dogs are going to bite. We're not going to using dogs for biting. We're using dogs for detecting drugs. We're using dogs for helping police departments find somebody. We're not using dogs to bite. So the optic of that was terrible. I didn't want that to be part of, you know, the image of this day. Another reason, a more practical reason, is when dogs are present, they're barking. Okay, so and that's just, and people can't hear when orders are being given, so we wanted to do dogs differently too. Like if you look at what happened in May of 2020 with the ICE detention center, dogs were present. The dogs aren't doing anything other than being a distraction, they're making noise, and so that, you know, wanted to make sure that we had calm. That was one of the goals. Try and de-escalate it. The dogs wouldn't help. That would only escalate the situation. So during the time we were waiting for security teams to arrive, we had 5 different sheriff's offices send their special response team. We had, as I said before, Suffolk, Hampden, Norfolk, Barnstable, and Plymouth counties. So I'd like to thank all the special response teams and the COs that came out from them. Also the Massachusetts Department of Correction, they were sent as well, quite a number of people. Once we had the right size group of security officers to respond, we were able to go to the housing unit, and once the inmates saw that we had well over 100 correctional staff, and during this time we were trying to de-escalate them, trying to talk them down, tell them we don't want anybody to get hurt. People could get hurt if you don't cooperate with us. We want you to cooperate, we want you to go back to your cells. And so we were messaging to the inmates all day, we don't want anybody to get hurt. And by holding off, by being patient, if we had just gone in with the probably 20 to 30 security SRTs, a special response team, people would have gotten hurt. If we had just gone in with just the people here, we would have been outnumbered, and that would have had to result in more force being used to subdue 75 inmates. Because when you are trying to subdue 70 and get 75 inmates to cooperate, when you've got lesser numbers, you're going to have to probably use force. Yes?
You said you were messaging the inmates. Was it sending a message by not sending the dogs, or were you otherwise?
Several. So literally sending a message. So we actually had a lieutenant, we had a colonel, we had a captain that were talking to the inmates through the windows, and because some of these windows open, and so we we're telling them, please go back to your cells. We want to, get back in there. We want to just, take back the housing unit. And, I will be cautious with my words because I don't want to compare the inmates to children. But everybody here knows when some kids are having like a meltdown, and they get to the point, they're overtired, and they get to the point of no return, and you just can't reason with the child. I'm not calling the inmates children, but it got to that same level of point of no return, and we couldn't reason with them anymore. They were just completely adamant. They were digging their heels in, and so they gave us a list of demands. Some of the demands were reasonable: better grievance process, better or more available reentry programming. And I told them these are some of the things, lower canteen prices. I told them these are things I campaigned on. These are things I'm going to be working on. Some of the demands were to speak to me right away. That wasn't going to happen. If I'd made myself available to them, that probably would have escalated them even more. And the only reason somebody in my situation would actually put themselves there is they think they have an ego big enough to de-escalate a situation that's already out of control. No. If me presenting myself would not have calmed it, it would have probably escalated things. But I wrote back, one of the lieutenant handed that letter to them they didn't even read it. They took it, tore it up, threw it back at us, and that was the end of that. And we knew, and this was around 2 o'clock or so was when that happened. So at this point where, the security staff were arriving in the dozens, and we had well over probably 120, 130 security staff from all over the state. DOC sent, I think, 70. The different sheriff's offices sent anywhere from 10 to 30 each, depending on the sheriff's office. And so that's when we took the commanders of all the different security response units. We brought them inside the special investigation unit. We looked at the video footage. We showed them what it looked like inside the housing unit before the cameras were all destroyed, and then once they had a look at what it looks like. And you'll see some of the things we'll show you. There's some water on the floor. A lot of what they did was they took soapy water, threw that on the floor, made it really slippery. They took a lot of beds, mattresses, furniture. They barricaded themselves in. Fortunately, the doors were designed to open inwards, because if we had to push the doors open, we wouldn't have been able to get in. But fortunately, they opened in, so we could actually get inside. They had destroyed a lot of property, and they made a lot of weapons, which we're going to show you in the pictures. And but once we showed them what that looked like on camera, then we brought the commanders of the different, like the DOC and the 5 jails plus our jail, over to an identical housing unit that was vacant, that was empty. And they said, okay, this is the lay of the land. And so that's when they said, okay, now it's time to go take back the housing unit. I made it clear that, the public is watching. I said, be judicious with your use of force. I said, we're going to show force. We're going to show up with over 100 security staff. We showed force by using CS gas and flashbangs, and that disorientated the inmates so that they could enter, the COs and security staff could enter and get past the barricades. And, but once inside, the inmates basically succumbed to, and they got down, they were handcuffed, they were brought out one by one, but for one person who resisted and wasn't hurt in that resistance. Neither the COs or the inmate was hurt when that one inmate resisted. There were no injuries. Nobody had to go to the hospital. Some people were sent to the medical unit just to be checked up on different things, but generally speaking, there were nobody was injured. So.
Did use gas and flashbangs?
That's right. Yeah, we use CS and flash. And so once so they took back the unit, and then that was around 3:30 or so, maybe 4 o'clock. It was finally, we took back that unit, and then we still had the other unit, GA. GA had 63 inmates in it. And the 63 inmates in there, of those 63, 3 were the agitators. In the first one, it was 17 were agitators. Now, the number 17 appears twice. There were 17 agitators in the GB unit, the first one, the one that you see right here. But then there were also, this number 17, not to be confused with, we also sent 17 inmates to Ash Street. Those were a different 17. There were 17 inmates in one unit and 3 inmates for a total of 20 that we sent to other counties, because they were the ringleaders here, and they know people here, and they were instigators here. They have a following here. We sent them somewhere where nobody knows who they are, and it's not going to be an issue. But then there was 17 people that we had to send to Ash Street because we couldn't rehouse them here in this facility. And by the way, I forgot to mention this earlier. One of the reasons we want to put locks on doors and toilets and cells is because once we do that with several of our housing units, we can close Ash Street, and this has been covered in the past. So anyway, what's that?
Can you do a little play-by-play with the pictures?
Yeah, sure. Do that right now. So actually, I was getting to that. So these are still photos that were all taken this morning. We will be releasing videos eventually. The videos of what happened are evidence of a crime right now, so we're not releasing those just yet. And I've spoken with Major Bob Perry. He's in charge of the SI unit, Special Investigation Unit. They look at inmate crimes. These were crimes. It was destruction of property and nearly inciting a riot. So they they're going to collect all the evidence, write up their reports, bring that to the district attorney, and then add charges. And that's kind of where we're at right now. So having said all that, I will roll through these pictures. And like I said, Jonathan has already put these on the website. Did you already put them up on the website?
They all have access to them. We're going to post them on Facebook. And
Okay. Yeah, and you can take whatever you want for your stories and use them. We, SIU took pretty much all of these pictures, and we made sure that there's no identifying information, whether they are correctional staff or inmates. Yes, sir.
Do you anticipate how many people facing charges right now?
20.
Just the 20?
20 as of right now, because we know about the 17 ringleaders in GB and the 3 ringleaders in GA. The interesting thing about the use of showing force was when and there's a couple of pictures of security staff lining up in the dozens going in. Once the folks the inmates from GA saw that, they started cleaning the housing unit in GA, which was not what we expected. It not only did not escalate, they started cleaning up for us. It was so that huge use of not use of force. I almost spoke. That huge showing of force. The potential for that actually de-escalated things, because they if we had presented 10, 15, 20 people, they outnumbered. In one housing unit 75 and the other housing unit 63, that wouldn't have been taken serious. But thankfully, the rest of the state came together and sent us right. So anyway, I'll go through these right now. And this is the correctional officer, the control desk. And what we have, do I have a pointer on this? Does this have a pointer? It does, okay, good. So right here over on the left, if you can see where I'm circling this, there's a red button right here. I'm putting it right over here, if you can see it over to the left in the upper left corner. That red button is what the security officers hit. That deactivated this entire control panel, making it so that the inmates couldn't control it themselves and let themselves out. If the COs hadn't hit that, and they tried to break it open, because not only did the COs hit it, they deactivated, they also locked it, but this inmates still broke it open, and you can see they ripped out. This is a very expensive piece. This is probably the most expensive piece that we have to replace. I don't know the exact cost. Chris, you doesn't know either. Okay, so, but this area, this was the fire extinguisher that was used, which you saw aerial footage of. They were blasting it out, and that was the only one they used. But you can see the fan, that was taken apart, but I'll go through these pretty quick. We've got about 50 of them. This piece, this black thing, is what the inmates would have their tablets stored in. This is actually not BCSO property, that's property of Securus, so that was theirs. This is the main entrance where we came in, and when the inmates backed out, and when the footage is released, you'll see that this fence, this railing right here, the COs quickly backed out, locked the door. They were seconds away from being locked in there with the inmates, which would have been a hostage situation. It was really that close. It's incredible they got out when they did, because it could have gotten, if it was a hostage situation, it would have been a completely different game. So that's more of the control desk. And you'll just see it's just a big mess everywhere. These items right here over to the right, those are mattresses, and they're folded up, and they were used to barricade off stuff. As you can see, everything was just destroyed.
Well, once the inmates realized they were locked in and the COs were out, it was kind of game over, right? They didn't have hostages.
No, they didn't, but you can't reason with unreasonable people. And at this point, they were so far removed from being reasoned with, even at 9 o'clock, we knew that, I knew that we were not going to be able to talk them down. And even though I responded to their demands, I wanted to at least make sure I did my job and tried to de-escalate the situation. But we were 99% sure it wasn't going to work. But we still did our job. We still numerous times made numerous efforts. But they thought they had leverage over us, turn the phones back on now, was one of the demands. That was actually the first demand, turn the phone. We're not going to do that for obvious reasons. But you can see the door handle here. This is the case officer. They destroyed that to get in. This is one of the ceiling fixtures. Things to point out. This actually, when I was in there earlier today, one of the things I noticed about it was how bad it smelled. And what that smell is actually homebrew. They were actually brewing their own, which is contraband. They're not supposed to be doing that. But it particularly, and I mention that right now because particularly in this corner is where it smelled especially bad. I think Chris, we were just going to call Serve Pro and they'll be all set, right? Clean it up, yeah. That's actually, no, we're actually gonna call somebody we're gonna get some quotes in here, and because we wanna find out, we're gonna clean this up in-house, but we want to, I mean, maybe if the quote comes back small enough and the amount of overtime is reasonable enough to not, it's a better idea to call in a vendor to clean this up rather than pay people overtime. We might go that route. But otherwise, Surf Pro will be there for us. So over here, you actually have like a shank. There's something that somebody could be stabbed with right there. And you'll see a number of these. So that's one right in this, almost dead smack in the middle. I know sometimes the red dot is hard to see. But then there's just, there's another one right over here. It's another, in the lower left corner, the circling, that's another broom handle that was used to be This was part, and I mentioned on Friday, they were breaking apart beds, the steel frames. This is one of them. So on both edges, here and here, that was welded steel. And so that is something that could be used as a club, but also to, scratch, slice, and there was very sharp edges there as well.
So we're seeing the damage, of course, but could you possibly revisit why this is not being considered a riot?
There was no violence. There was damage, yeah. A riot by definition needs violence. And this could have become a riot, it definitely could have, if the COs hadn't locked this down and if they hadn't shut down that control panel and the inmates let themselves out, and then you have everybody outside in the courtyard and you've got correctional officers tackling inmates trying to regain control, then that would have become a use of force. The inmates would have physically fought back, and then we could call it a riot. But but right now this was just a lot of damage, but it wasn't it wasn't a riot. Although it was very close to being a riot, so.
Sure.
Yes, sir.
You're the new guy in town. What's your message to these inmates in this facility in the wake of what happened?
Please don't do this again. It's not gonna go well for you. It's not. Because the 20 people who were the ringleaders saying, we're not leaving our housing units. Guess what? You left the county. You left your housing unit, you left the jail, and you left the county. So it didn't go well for you. It's not gonna go well for you. But like I said, sometimes you can't reason with unreasonable people. A lot of the demands that they were making, things they were unhappy about, but those demands weren't why they did this. They didn't want to move their housing unit. Those are things I can't paint on, I'm gonna be doing anyway. And those things you're not gonna win this. It's just so please don't do that. Cooperate with us. We want you to be here at the jail for as short amount of time as possible. And we want to put you back out on the street in better shape than you were, and work with us on that.
Are you 3 days later mad about what happened, sad about what happened, or frustrated?
No, just doing my job. Yeah, we're gonna do an after-action review. We're gonna look at what we can do better. One of the things I wanna do differently, if this should ever happen again, is have my assistant by my side the entire day, all day long, taking notes. What room I'm in, who's in the room with me, what time is it, what are the decisions we're making, what are ideas we're throwing around, what ideas did we rule out. Every moment of the day, I want that person with me. So that way, part of an after-action review, if it ever goes to court, we can say, okay, here's what we did every step of the way. This crept up on us. I was actually planning on doing red teams anyway, which is a drill that you would simulate a scenario like this, but it's not actually going on, and you have one person just keep adding another layer of complication to it. No, they just did this, they did that, and then you work through it and you come up with a process. But one of the things I would do differently is I would have my assistant with me the entire time, documenting everything I said, because I want every decision to be documented, because at no point was I making decisions alone. Everything was done with at least a half a dozen people in the room. So no, I'm not angry. We're dealing with a difficult population. This isn't the first time this has happened. We had an ICE incident in May of 2020. There was the Easter riots. There was in 2001. That was a lot worse of a situation. The people that were here, the inmates were out in the courtyard. They were on top of the roofs. People did get hurt. And there was a lot more damage to the facility. More housing units were taken over. So am I angry? No, this is part of the job. We take it on, we address it, we deal with it, we resolve it, and then we try and make it so it doesn't happen again, or decrease the chances.
But the inmates responsible for all this damage, $200,000, shouldn't they be charged?
They are going to be charged, yeah. That's going to be part of that. They are going to be charged. Yeah, that was where I mentioned that earlier. That's part of the investigation, then turning it over, the charges over to the district attorney's office. And as far as, getting blood from a stone, are we going to be able to get that money from them? That I have to leave up to the district attorney. That's beyond my job. I don't have any say in that, so. Yeah. Yes.
How important is this issue of suicides in your jails here, and how important is it for this work to continue?
Oh, extremely important. We can multitask. Yeah, we had already moved multiple housing units all week, and this particular housing unit had some, challenging inmates in it, 17 in one and 3 in the other. But just because somebody else might do something wrong, it doesn't mean we don't do the right thing. I still have a job to do. We have to improve the situation here with suicides, and we also have to close Ash Street. When we close Ash Street, we provide more programming here at, to the inmates. We save a lot more money. We don't spend. So we are doing multiple things by doing these shifting around. But because some people decided to take advantage of a situation, does that mean we shouldn't do the right thing? It would be like saying just because some people are going to abuse welfare means we shouldn't do welfare anymore. It's just, this is not how we can operate. We can't let them hold us hostage to us doing the right thing. Yes,
Sheriff,
sir.
do you think this sets back the effort to close Ash Street?
No. This actually, I think what this is going to do is actually speed things up, and that was the silver lining to all of this, is that it's going to cost at least $500,000 per housing unit, and we have 11 of them, to put toilets in the cells, and then we have to put locks on doors. So now with the silver lining to this is now we've got the state's attention, because we were going to put toilets in cells and locks on doors in these 2 housing units to prevent something like this from going on. And so now now the state knows exactly why we need to be able to lock doors.
Is it a design flaw? Why is it there are no locks on all the doors?
There's no locks on doors because there are no toilets in cells, because whoever designed this place back in the 1980s, and I will very bluntly say, should never ever get a contract again. They shouldn't, because they designed a jail that you can't lock doors. There was, like I said, we have a capacity for 1,400. Half of our capacity we can't put behind a locking door. And an inmate is not just an inmate. An inmate is also has a complicated background where they have to be housed differently than other inmates depending on who they are. We have a waiting trial, we have sentenced, but we also have people with gang issues and enemy issues and mental health issues, and so we can't mix all of those people. So the classification department has a real challenging job trying to house 700 people and keep everybody in the right place.
Do you think that's going to expedite reopening what was the ICE center?
No, we're not going to open up ICE again. No need to. We can't do anything with it.
I mean, you talked a month and a half ago about revamping that.
We're going to use the ICE building. So I've come up with 3 different ways to close Ash Street. The first way was to retrofit the ICE detention center and turn that into single cells so we can bring those single cell inmates from Ash Street to here. That was the first way. The second way was to put inmates in GC, a big gymnasium area, as a new, so we would retrofit that. So that was also very expensive. The third way we came up with just a few weeks ago was that if we can put toilets and cells and locks on doors in 2 or 3 housing units, we can close Ash Street. And we have the money to do that in-house.
Without dealing with the ICE center?
Correct. ICE is now, we're in the process of turning that into a training academy, because one of the things we were previously doing is we were spending $150,000 a year across the street on rent when we have a vacant building right here. So one of the first things we said was, why don't we just, instead of spending $150,000 a year with a 10-year contract, why don't we spend $75,000, $100,000, $120,000, whatever it is, it's of that magnitude, to retrofit the ICE building to make that our training academy, and we don't have to waste money across the street anymore.
And have you gotten any messages from Beacon Hill in any way, legislature, executive, about stepping up funding to help you get this place in shape?
I sent Maura Healy a text message yesterday along with the Secretary of Public Safety, and I included the Commissioner of DOC on that, although she doesn't have anything to do with that particular aspect. But I said, we are going to be requesting more money because we have a plan to, on this particular housing unit and GA, to put toilets and cells and locks on doors using money we have in-house. We can do that in-house. But then we still have 9 other housing units. So what I was going to do is 1 each year that I'm here, not including the Women's Center. But now with this is the silver lining. Hopefully now the state will say, put locks on doors and toilets and cells in the next 12 or 24 months, but they'll give us the money to do it. Because we can do it, but it's gonna take years to do it if we do it alone, because we have to budget it in and, get a little bit, like let the money trickle in to do that. But if the state wants to give us the money to do that right now, we'll do that now, and we'll close Ash Street, and then something like this is not gonna happen in this.
Have a cost estimate?
It's about $500,000 per housing unit, and we have 11.
Times 9.
Locks on doors. Aren't inmates have a better chance of committing suicide without anybody seeing them? Be able to get them?
Depends on the inmate. So the inmates at risk for committing suicide are the new admits, and those are the inmates that we put in a dormitory style setting, and that's why we had to shuffle things around. So it depends on the inmate. If it's somebody who's, you have the awaiting trial, pre-trial, and you've got the sentenced, and most of our inmates, I think all of the inmates have commit suicide have all been here 10 days or less.
What is the suicide rate at Bristol County Jail?
3 times the national average.
Which gives us a number of how many a year?
It's not number per year. I think it's about 100, it's roughly 150 per 100,000, whereas the national average, I think, is about 50 per 100,000. It's in the Lindsay Hayes report that was just released on April 14th.
Why so much higher here?
That's what the Lindsay Hayes report identified. There were 23 different variables that Lindsay Hayes said you need to do to decrease your rate of recidivism. One of the things was the housing of inmates, where we house inmates. Another one was that 7 out of 7 of our inmate suicides all used bunk beds, and so the way we have to redesign the bunk beds is, will help decrease that. We have issues with the way we take inmates in, the way we screen them, the way we release them back. There was 23 specific things. If you look at the report, it says 24. The 24th was, hey, Sheriff, implement the first 23. So there's actually 23 specific ones, the 24th being a directive to me. So we have but our rate of suicide is 3 times the national average. And it's something that, Lindsay Hayes, our, expert that we hired, he's been doing this for 42 years. He's looked at 3,800 inmate suicides over his 42 years. And he came back with 23 specific recommendations, which we talked about on April 14th, and that's been so
Can we
yes.
get the damage guy in there and talk to us, just with a bunch of deadlines coming up?
Yeah, sure. So let me finish going through these pictures really quickly. It's actually, here's some contraband. You see over here, this on the far left, that doorknob was found in the sock, which could have been used as kind of like a ball and chain type of weapon. This is like a wrapped up needle. It's more like probably the thickness of a pen. So that was a shank. This kind of cloth on this piece of wood, which has some nails on it, was also used as a club. And so that's just ramen over there, that's nothing. But here's actually a better view of those pictures, the weapons that were used. So you can see though that there was just like, and all these pictures will be available to you. So right here, point this out, on these railings you can see there was a kind of a fabric, like a sheet of some sort. Those were originally going across. So the inmates made it so that when the security officers came in, they couldn't just run up the stairs. They'd have to cut through those first. And the floor, as you can see, is still wet because the inmates had used a lot of soapy water. In fact, you can see a lot of puddles there. This was one of the things they wanted, their list of demands. They want TVs in cells. I said, no, you guys just broke your TV. You're not getting a new one. I actually did say that. So you can see it's just a lot of damage here. This is one of the beds they took apart to make it into a weapon. That's our dehumidifier trying to help dry out the place. This is a tattoo gun. It was contraband that was found. As you can see, the water there is from was always
That's from
soapy.
Friday, I took
Yeah,
these Friday.
these are ones from Friday. So that's it. So these, I don't know. Happy to take any other questions. I know you guys have deadlines and everything. So
So there were people in jail
wait,
here.
this guy out there. We'll get you next. Yes.
Talk a little bit about some of you mentioned the CS gas. Were there any other in the array of tactics you could use in a situation like this? Rubber bullets, pepper
Those
spray, were any of those used at all?
CS gas, flashbangs, and we went in with rubber bullets, but we didn't have to use them, to my knowledge. We didn't have to use them. So as soon as we went in with the opened the door a little bit, threw flashbangs inside, I think probably 3 to 5 of them, I think is my remember. Those, when they explode, they disorient you, they're so loud. And then once we got the door open, with using paintball guns, they shot the CS gas into, small paintballs of CS gas into the housing unit, and some if there were some inmates who were very close by, and to push them back, they would shoot them with the little balls, just like a little paintball, and it has the same effect. But this, when it explodes, it's got CS in it, so that's an irritant. It's
What is that? What is that?
pepper spray. Pepper spray. It's an irritant. What it does is you're not going to be able to keep your eyes open. You're going to be choking on your snot coming out. It's just when the inmates were coming out, everybody could walk. I mean, it's an irritant, but it's just like pepper spray, like Jonathan said. So.
And correct to say that everyone was let out into the courtyard.
That's correct. One by one, inmates were brought out, but for one inmate who resisted, who was quickly subdued using force, but certainly not excessive force, person was never even hurt, everybody complied. And it was the large presence, that followed the afternoon of trying to de-escalate the situation, talking to the inmates, trying to explain to them, we don't want anybody to get hurt, we want you to comply. It just really trying to reassure them of that. But again, they were at the point where you couldn't reason with them, but once they saw that huge contingent of security, they complied. So.
Sure, if you would.
We had a rough number Friday of 100 to 200 officers total.
130.
Staff. What would be a finer?
Probably 130. Roughly 130, yes. Sir?
If you would,
yes.
you said you're going to take some time, do an after...
action review, yeah.
Action review, but for our purposes, your off-the-cuff assessment of your, not you personally, but as a whole, the DOC and the whole response to this. What's your assessment?
My assessment, these things happen. It's not the first time. It's not the first time here. It's not going to be the last time here. These things have happened, like these types of, standoffs, or, where a lot of melee happens, sometimes riots happen. These happened in correctional facilities. You've got a lot of people who have troubled histories, and they're, contained together. They feed off each other. There's a lot of groupthink mentality that went into this. These are folks who challenge the system through evidence of the fact that they are here. Challenging the system is putting it mildly. Inside this particular housing unit, you can see all the weapons that they had. We had several people awaiting trial for multiple murder charges. We didn't know what we were going into. So, that was... but these things, but the after action review, I don't want to say that sounds so nonchalant though, the after action review then allows us to look, what could we do better next time? How can we decrease the chance of this happening again? So it's not, we don't just say, okay, these things happen and that's the end of it. No, we're self-critical. We say, what could we have done differently? What could we do better next time? And that process will take weeks, if not a couple months, to figure that out. But it's, we'll get through that though. So,
Sure.
yes.
So there were people in these cells here charged with murder, but the doors did not have locks on them.
That's correct. And that's why I had that's correct. The entire housing unit was awaiting trial. And this housing unit was one of the housing units. It was one of the first two housing units that when I planned in January, and I've been talking about this ever since, that we are going to put locks on doors. And my predecessor actually left me $1.5 million in canteen money, and canteen money can only be used on inmate goods. And so a toilet is an inmate good. It benefits the inmate. So we're going to use that money so I was actually fortunate that my predecessor left me with $1.5 million to do the very thing that we are going to be doing. But we had planned on doing toilets and cells, and therefore locks on doors, since January, exactly for this reason. And in the process of moving the inmates out of that housing unit, so we can do that and make it more suicide resistant, so among others, this happened. So this actually makes our point why we need to have locks on doors. So there was...
Sure, you have talked a lot about the staffing issues. Did that contribute at all to the response on Friday? Any of the staffing issues?
No, I don't think so. Any facility, if this happened in Plymouth County or Hampden County or wherever, they would have been calling us as well. And we would send 10, 20 of our special response teams. No one, with the exception of the DOC, maybe the DOC, because they have 4,500 staff. When I worked there back in 2008, 2009, that's how many staff were working there. They had 4,500 staff. Maybe the DOC could handle that within themselves, but every other jail would, if they were in this similar situation, identical situation, they would need to call for backup as well, because you can't send in, like if you had 75 inmates, you can't send in fewer staff than you have inmates. You can be overrun. You could, but you're going to have people getting hurt. And that's what we avoided. If we could have done this at 11 o'clock in the morning. We could have done it with the people we had in-house. We could have brought the dogs in. We could have, the inmates would have been afraid of the dogs. Some people, if they tried to resist, they might have gotten bit by dogs. Security staff, if we did it in-house, they could have taken it back. Yes, I believe they could have. They had the capability, but people would have gotten hurt, both COs and inmates. And that's why I waited and waited for more people to show up, so that way, we could have a large enough response. But yeah, our staff could have taken it back in-house, but people on both sides would have gotten hurt, and we wanted to avoid that.
Well,
Yeah.
afterwards, has there been, are COs scared to come to work now because they're seeing all these weapons on scene?
No, this is, they know this. They know what this is. They know, and we actually had a job fair on Saturday that was, and Sam, you were at that job fair on Saturday? How many people showed up for the job fair?
Off the top of my head, maybe 13.
13 people, okay, show up for the job fair. We have a number of promising applicants.
From Wednesday's job fair, from Saturday's, I'd say so, yes.
Yeah. So even with this going on, I mean, and some people might say, hey, this looks like an exciting, career. It wasn't boring, that's for sure. So yes, ma'am.
You were mentioning about the weapons, just to your knowledge, they weren't used either against the corrections officers or against each other, or do you
Correct.
know?
Yeah, like you saw that shank with the, the handle with the long needle on it. That was not used on anybody, because if somebody were to use something of that size, you have to go to the hospital or deal with it, probably not in-house, but nobody got hurt.
And total damage assessment price?
$100,000 to $200,000. Chris, our maintenance coordinator, is maintenance director, support services, does a whole bunch of things. That's still accurate, 100 to 200?
Yeah, we just did a quick walkthrough, until we could get in there, clean the facility, and then start assessing every piece in there, from HVAC to electrical, to plumbing. It's gonna be up there.
Yeah.
And Paul, at what
Yes.
point did they realize that they weren't going anywhere since they were, when they realized they were locked in, did they know that their time was up?
I think the tide really turned. I mean, like we said, we were talking de-escalation the whole day, trying to talk them down. Some people might say, well, why didn't you just wait until Saturday or Sunday? Why'd you have to throw flashbangs in there and use CS gas? Because if we had waited till Saturday or Sunday, the rest of the jail, meanwhile, is on lockdown, and half of our inmates aren't in locking cells. And so now we could have the same situation unfold somewhere else, because now when we're on lockdown, you're agitating a lot of people who want to come out of their cells, want to do programming. We've taken away their communication with the outside world. The entire jail was, cut off communication from the outside world. So that wasn't an option to wait it out. So we couldn't wait it out on the long end, and also we couldn't do it on the short end, because if we had just rushed in, people would have gotten hurt. So that's why we had to wait for that sweet spot. And I think when we had dozens of inmates, and you can see the aerial footage, and we have some other photos that will actually, the photos, I think you might have taken those of where, I'm standing there and then you see everybody going in. You see dozens of security staff walk in. There was windows, the inmates had windows, they could see what was coming. And I think that's when they saw, well over 100, they were completely outnumbered with people with protective gear. And they also heard over and over from me through, intermediaries, we don't want anybody to get hurt. They just got down, and so the security staff, they just did their job so professionally. Everybody, it was really impressive for me to watch them, escort people out one after another without incident. Nobody was giving them a hard time. They were just complete professionals. It was really nice to see that. So there's another question, I thought.
You said 20 inmates are facing charges. Could you elaborate on that process? Where is it at right now?
So the Special Investigation Unit looks at inmate crimes while they're here. And so that's, they have to go through the footage, do interviews, write up their reports, present something, of tangible evidence to the district attorney, and then discuss it with the DA as to whether or not the DA is going to press charges. But it's just like any other crime, it just happens inside the jail. But it would be the same process. The SIU are just like police. They are looking at evidence, building a case, and then they're going to present it to the DA for prosecution. Same process.
How long does that take?
Weeks, months. Depends on, probably I'm guessing the weeks. This is 20 people. They're a good unit. So there was another.
Thank you.
No, cool. Thanks for coming over, you guys. Good seeing you all again.